Okay, so when Matt gave me the title, because he set up the series, it was outside the walls of the church, so I was trying to decide, but then I realised, because the things I was coming up with, I thought, what could I tell you about? Nails? I think that happens outside the walls of the church. I like to go and get my nails done. Also, coming back from holiday in Mexico, I'll tell you about that. And maybe about good food. I like going out for food. But apparently, then Matt clarified that it was about God outside of the walls of the church. So I thought I'd better not tell you about the process of getting my nails done and how I love that. But, so, if I'm not going to tell you about me to begin with, and my nails, and Mexico and the sunshine I had there, I figured we should start with listening to somebody who's a little bit more on it about talking about what should be happening out there than what my initial thoughts were. Does that make sense? So we're going to think about what Jesus had to say about what should happen out there. So, who was here last month? Any of you? We said about bringing your Bibles. How many of you brought your Bibles? Because we're going to start off by reading a passage. Okay, brilliant. You're going to break into groups. You're just going to have like 4 or 5 minutes to do this. There's Bibles here, there's Bibles there, there's Bibles over there, I think, as well. If you didn't bring one, go and grab one, and in your groups, you're going to read this passage, and then I'm going to talk about it, okay? So you need to do the first bit in order that I don't talk about nails and Mexico, okay? So you probably want to do that. And then jump back to your friends and just read that. Adults, if you haven't got a Bible, you can grab one too, because there's loads there. You. What is your favourite part of church? Okay? Your favourite part. Talk to the person next to you for 30 seconds, and they need to know why. Okay? Go. Your favourite part of church. Okay, how many of you said singing? Of course Matt said singing. How many of you said the youth stuff? Yeah, a few of you. How many of you said the biscuits after church? Or cake, yeah? So Matt said I'm a church leader, and I'm going to be totally honest, and there are members of my church in here tonight. My favourite part of church is when it finishes, and I lock the doors, and I think, I don't have to go for another week. That is honestly my favourite moment in church, and they all know that. Sometimes I turn up really grumpy, don't I, and think, I don't want to be here. A lot of time. Do you know what? It's often when football's on. There's loads of like Premiership matches that kick off at 4, aren't they? And that's the time our church starts, and so that makes me even more miserable. But worst church leader ever. So if you're going to talk about this talk, maybe use on Twitter like hashtag worst church leader ever. But that is honestly my worst bit of church. And my best bit of church is when I finish. And I'm a church leader. That's a little bit ridiculous. And so I want you to think about the fact that my talk is about being out there. And that's what I'm really passionate about. That's what I'm totally... So I love Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And then it comes to Sunday and I'm like, I have to come and sing songs. And I have to go and listen to a talk. Or I have to go and talk. Sometimes I even get bored of my own voice, okay? But what I love is thinking about what Jesus is doing out there and getting out there and getting involved. That is what I'm excited about. It's really nice to meet with my friends and to be excited, and like for some of you, church will be the highlight of your week, and that's brilliant. But for me, I want to be out there doing what God's doing and being involved out there. And I think for me, Matthew 25 in this passage sums it up, okay? Now, this is beautiful, isn't it? It's a nice piece of paper. For those of you who were born in like 2000 onwards, this is like the original PowerPoint. Okay, so this is like old school, and I don't really like being very technical, so I'm going to do some writing with a pen. That's a novelty, isn't it? So, in that passage, Jesus tells people that they need to be doing stuff, that he'll recognise who they are, and he'll take them up into heaven when they've done stuff for him. Okay, so he talks about 6 groups of people. Matt, actually, could you come up and read it for me? Is that alright? Just verses 30, maybe 35 and 36. Is that right?
For I was hungry and you fed me.
Yeah, you can keep those. I'll catch up. I'm fast.
I was thirsty and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger and you invited me into your home. I was naked and you gave me clothing. I was sick and you cared for me. I was in prison and you visited me.
So in that passage, Jesus talks about 6 different types of people. Okay, and I'm going to group some of them together. So I'm going to put the hungry and the naked in one group, because I think these are the people that God's interested in, okay? Now, you don't often come across naked people in your life, do you? Oh, there's not enough names out there. I'm glad I live in Hartcliffe. In Hartcliffe, there are not many naked people, just so you know. But sometimes, when I think about hungry and naked, sometimes those things make us feel uncomfortable. So Jesus is saying, when you see somebody who's hungry, feed them. And when you see somebody who's naked, clothe them. Now, for me, sometimes being out there and doing stuff out there makes me feel uncomfortable. Sometimes I'm cooking tea and doing stuff, and all of a sudden I have to share my tea with them. So Jesus is saying, when you've cooked, when you've got that much, share it. Now, when I'm hungry, that's not the greatest thing, is it, that you want to be doing? You don't want to be giving half your jam sandwich away. And it makes you feel not very happy. Or if you were to find somebody naked on your street, and Jesus says clothe them, you're going to feel a bit awkward about being the person to approach them, aren't you? Yeah? Or would you all be fine with that? No? Yeah? No? There's a story in the Bible about the Good Samaritan, and loads of you will know that. But I was thinking, actually, sometimes the things that happen out there cause us to be uncomfortable. Me and Steph were talking about it, and he was like, the Good Samaritan is a little bit like a City fan helping a Rovers fan who's just been beaten up in a football hooligan incident. And actually going out of his way to do something that actually he doesn't want to do, but he knows is right. And putting him in hospital, taking him to the hospital, not putting him in hospital, but in a nice way, taking him to hospital, even though they're both wearing team shirts that are opposed. That was how extreme it was for the Good Samaritan, okay? So sometimes, when we're called to be out there, to do stuff out there, sometimes we're called to be generous. We have to give stuff away. And that can be really hard. I really like things. I actually do really like things. And when God calls me to be generous and asks me to share my money or to share my food or to do something, I find it really uncomfortable. Do you find it uncomfortable? You know, like if you've got siblings and your parents ask you to share, that's a bit awkward, isn't it? Because you don't really want to. But Jesus says in this passage, be generous. With people out there, put yourself in a situation where you're uncomfortable. Then the next one I'm going to put together is thirsty and sick. Okay, so those are linked. And sometimes when you meet people out there and you're doing stuff out there, sometimes it's obvious. So when somebody's sick, sometimes that's really obvious, isn't it? They're like coughing and spluttering all over your face. Or they've got snot coming down their cheeks or whatever. But when they're thirsty, it's not as obvious, is it? And sometimes, for us being out there, it's about God, working through us and showing us the things that we've not necessarily seen ourselves. And for seeing sick people and being alongside sick people, sometimes that's not obvious either because they're behind closed doors. So you know when your friends don't come to school because they're sick, it's really hard to be by their side then, isn't it? But me and Steph were in Mexico last week. And while we were there were some shootings that went on in Orlando, in a nightclub, and I'm sure you heard about them. But for us, we were so near to Orlando, within the world. And actually, I think that the guy who did it was actually really sick. He had a mental illness, and that wasn't very obvious until he went and caused something catastrophic to happen. But do you know what? There would have been people that Jesus was saying to them, go and stand by him, go and talk to him, go and be alongside him, go and work out what was going on. And there's people like that within your school and within your community who actually, they're not really obviously sick, and they're not really obviously thirsty, but God's saying to you, go and be amongst them. Go and work out what I see and stand by them. It might be, actually, they're the quietest person in your year and they've never spoken a word about something. But actually, Jesus is saying to you, go and be nice to them, go and give them a drink. Go and be nice to them when they're sick, wipe their nose for them, help them to the bathroom, whatever it is, go and stand alongside them. And then the last group, is the stranger imprisoned. Now I think this one is the hardest because I think sometimes when I'm out there, outside of the walls of the church, I can be quite proud and think I've got lots to offer. Look at me, I can do this and I can do that. And I think when we think about these two sorts of groups, we have to take a step outside of ourselves and let go of our pride. We have to stop being proud. Because often the people who are imprisoned within our community are often the really bad people, and the strangers are often the weirdos, aren't they? That's true, isn't it? Like the people who are a bit strange in your school, you don't really want to be mixing with them, do you, in case your friends see? But Jesus says, when you invite them in, so when you invite them into your friendship group, when you're friends with the people who are down your street and actually they're really like being picked on by other neighbours, when you're nice to them, that's when you're serving God. And as I've said tonight, we run a football team, and there was a boy a few years ago who came and joined our team, and I don't really know why. He couldn't kick a ball to save his life. Sometimes that's okay if they can run. He couldn't run. And he came every week, and he was probably one of our most faithful comers to football training. And every week he'd turn up, and I'd be a bit like, oh, how are we going to teach him anything? And the other boys would be stood at training, and their hearts were sinking. They'd be a bit like, oh, we've got to be friends with him. It's really embarrassing. And after about 6 months, he hadn't really got any better. That's a bit awkward, isn't it, when you want to be picked for a squad, and your manager, coach, doesn't want to give you a place, and the boys on the pitch don't even want to pass you the ball to get it in the net. And for us, we realised a couple of months in that actually he didn't want to come and play football. What he wanted was a friend. And coming to football provided him with friendships that he never had before. And there was an acceptance there that actually, come the end of it, they really loved him and wanted to be a part of him. And he never became the best footballer, and he never became one of the football boys. They wouldn't necessarily invite him out when they went out socially, but they would be nice to him. And for me, that was the greatest thing to see, because they started to serve God. So Jesus says, if you want to get into heaven, you don't have to pray a prayer, you don't have to do this, you don't have to do that. I want you to come and be by my side if you'll serve me. If you'll lay aside your pride, if you'll kind of do the things that other people won't do, if you look for the unobvious stuff in life, that's who I want. That's who I want to do my mission and be on my team. And in that, I think, for me, I've got the biggest call on that because God loves me. And another outing of myself. I'm pretty rubbish. I get it wrong a lot of the time. And I don't really do the stuff God wants me to do a lot of the time. But if he loves me, I know that he loves them too. And I have a responsibility to love the people outside of there. And it gets a bit crazy because it becomes all about relationship. And these people that you get to know, you change as a person, and I've changed. So I've actually become somebody who's found it really quite easy to be generous, because I've realised what I've got, I have to give away because God's given it to me. And those who are thirsty and sick, I've realised that I have to be kind, because that's the calling that Jesus put on people. It's just to be generous, it's to be kind, and it's to be a friend. So this one is friend. And from that, so he said to me, Zoe, be generous, Zoe, be kind, and Zoe, be a friend. And from that, relationships happen, and friendships happen, and my friendship group and the people that I mix with now are people 5 years ago who I wouldn't have ever thought. it gets really exciting and it gets a bit random, and you realise you're talking to people that you never thought you'd talk to before, and all of a sudden you really love it. So from this, and from being generous and being kind and being friend, I've seen some crazy things happen. It meant that I was at a birth of a baby boy. That's a bit weird, isn't it? So when I started to offer sandwiches, or when I saw that somebody was thirsty, never did I think that I would watch the birth of a child. That wasn't, but that, do you know, I was the first person to hold that tiny baby that came into the world, and that was so exciting. A bit gross as well, I will admit. But then also, I never realised that it would mean that I'd have to sit in the police station whilst interviews happened and be people's responsible adults. It leads you into places that are quite scary, but people really trust you and they invite you into the places that actually they've got nobody else. When you invite them in, they invite you in back. And all of a sudden there's this thing where we really need each other, and actually I can lift something really heavy. So yesterday I sat in a police cell with you. Can you come and carry this new fridge freezer that I need? And it becomes a thing where we need one another. And that's what Jesus is getting at. You need to see this because they need to see you. And in that, you work together for something great. It took me to Africa when I made these relationships. I took 2 of the boys that I work with, very naughty boys, and I brought them back, don't panic. But it took me to Africa. We renovated. I really hate practical manual work. You can probably tell that by looking at me. But we went and we painted walls and we dug out trenches and we went and rebuilt a maternity ward in a hospital in Africa. Unexpected things happen when you're generous, kind, and somebody's friend. And then for me, I think the biggest thing that I've learned this year when you're these things to people is you plan your wedding and all of a sudden you end up with 9 bridesmaids, which my mum's despairing a bit about, and Steph just shakes his head at as to why does she need this entourage? But actually, do you know what? 2 of the football boys' girlfriends who I've been generous to, who I've been kind to, and who I've been a friend to, they've become my friends. And they're going to be 2 of my bridesmaids who, when we get married in this building next Easter Saturday, they're going to walk down the aisle preparing the way for me to go and make a big statement that leads me on into the rest of my life. I have met Jesus in them, and they've met Jesus in me. And there's something that as we step together, we move forward and we do life together. And that is the exciting thing. If you'd have told me that Anna and Georgina a couple of years ago would have been my bridesmaids, I would have laughed at you. Because we didn't get on. We didn't get on at all, especially me and Anna. And actually now, we're at the point where life happens and we happen together. And that's what I get excited about. I know that this week I'll see Anna and I'll see Georgina outside the walls of this church. And I'll get to see what God's doing in their life. Sometimes they recognise it, sometimes they don't. Their chaos in their life is just the same. But do you know what the ironic thing is? I started off by telling you that the best part of my church experience is when I close the doors. But the best thing about my church experience is when I go and open up that door on a Sunday, I have the question, will Anna and Georgina and will people like that be coming to this today? Because what happens out there brings people in here. And that is the best thing. In church, in your churches, and in within God, they find love and they find acceptance and they find generosity, they find kindness and they find friends. And so even though the best part of my church experience is locking the door, the best part of my week is unlocking the church doors and thinking who's going to come because of what's happened Monday to Saturday. And Jesus says, if you do that for the least of these, you've done it for me. And it's such a privilege to serve people. And I think it's really easy for me to say that, but actually you guys are in a similar position. God's got people that he wants you to meet. Tomorrow in school, there's things where you're going to have to feel a little bit uncomfortable, where you're going to have to lay aside your pride, where you're going to have to look a little bit harder than you thought you might. And he's saying, are you up for serving me? Are you up for doing, making jam sandwiches? It's that simple. He's not asked you to do, He hasn't asked you to run the school assembly for this week, you'll be glad to hear. He hasn't said to you, can you give 10 of your friends a Bible? Can you commit to praying for 3 of the worst teachers you've got for the next 5 years? He hasn't said that. He said, when you see somebody who's hungry, give them something to eat. When you see somebody who's thirsty, give them a glass of water. Share your Diet Coke with them. When you see somebody who's sick, care for them. That might be just sending a text. When you see somebody who's naked, clothe them. Just give away some of your clothes or buy a £5 topping Asda for them. When you see a stranger, invite them in. And when somebody's imprisoned, go and visit them. That's easy, isn't it? Those things are easy. You've all got bread in your cupboards at home. I'm sure your mum will let you have 2 slices. You've all got drinks with you, but it is that simple. Jesus says, when you're doing that, you're serving him. That is your mission. And for me, that is why I get most excited when I lock the doors of church and I think, what can I get involved in Monday to Saturday that God's doing already? How can I do it? And my life has been changed upside down, and it's really exciting, and sometimes it's really boring too, because sometimes I just have to drive people to job interviews or babysit Georgina's 2 kids for 3 hours, and then by the end of it, thank the Lord I'm not a parent myself. And some things are really menial, but actually it's exciting because I get to do what God's doing out there, and then hope that next Sunday they're back in here with me, and we just do life together. And so that, for me, is what life outside the walls of the church means, and that I'm going to hand over to you, because all it is being generous, kind, and a friend. And when you do that, you're serving God, and that's the best place you can be.